In the 1980s, Western news gave Libya's leader a new name, the Mad Dog of the Middle East. He was painted as a terrorist mastermind, a sponsor of violence from Europe to Africa. But behind the slogans, something more complicated was happening. Yes, there was blood on his hands, but there was also a deeper struggle over who controls the map and the oil of North Africa. In episode 1, we saw how Libya went from quiet kingdom to radical oil power that kicked out Western bases and took control of its resources. In this episode, we're going to see how the world turned that story into one word: terrorism. And we'll ask, was that label only about violence, or was it also about punishing a country that didn't play by the old rules? From the start, Gaddafi didn't just want to change Libya, he wanted to change the entire region. He called himself a revolutionary, not a president. He poured Libyan oil money into movements and governments he saw as part of the same fight against colonialism, apartheid, and Western domination. Libya sent cash, weapons, and training to armed groups and political causes from Palestine to southern Africa and beyond. Some were fighting clear systems of oppression. Others carried out attacks that killed civilians. In Western capitals, the details didn't matter. They all merged into one label. By the late 1970s and early 80s, Libya was officially on Western lists as a state sponsor of terrorism. That label opened the door to a new toolbox: sanctions, isolation, and covert attempts to weaken the regime. Here's where things get blurry on purpose. Some of the groups Libya backed absolutely carried out acts we would call terrorism today. But once you're on that list, almost anything you do can be presented as proof that you belong there. The politics and the violence get tangled together. With the terror sponsor label in place, the pressure campaign intensified. Officially, the goal was to punish Libya for supporting violent groups. Unofficially, it was also about squeezing a government that had taken control of oil and pushed out Western military power. Economic sanctions targeted Libya's ability to sell oil, buy parts, and access the global financial system. Travel restrictions and diplomatic isolation turned the country into a pariah state. Libyan planes and ships faced restrictions. Foreign companies had to calculate the risk of dealing with Tripoli. Ordinary Libyans found it harder to travel, study abroad, or import goods. Isolation wasn't just a headline, it was something people could feel in their daily lives. At the same time, an invisible war was underway. Intelligence services monitored Libyan diplomats, infiltrated exile communities, and looked for ways to undermine Gaddafi's support at home. Exiled opposition groups tried to mount coups and attacks with quiet encouragement from abroad. This wasn't a full-scale invasion yet. It was pressure, political, economic, and covert. The message to Gaddafi was clear: stop supporting our enemies, stop playing with oil and ideology, or this gets worse. Then came the explosions. In the 1980s, a series of high-profile attacks in Europe and the skies above it were linked, rightly or wrongly, to Libyan operatives. A bombing at a nightclub used by US service members in West Berlin. Attacks at airports. Later, the bombing of a passenger jet over Lockerbie, Scotland. Western governments accused Libya of being behind, or at least sponsoring, some of the worst acts. Whether every accusation was accurate or not, the political impact was huge. In the public imagination, Gaddafi stopped being just an anti-imperialist leader with radical ideas. He became a cartoon villain, the face of Arab terrorism. Here's the thing: once that image is locked in, it's powerful. It makes almost any action against your country look justified. Bombing raids become self-defense. Sanctions that hurt civilians become necessary pressure. Overthrow starts to look like a favor to the world. Western airstrikes hit Libyan targets. Facilities were bombed, soldiers and civilians killed. Gaddafi himself narrowly escaped. Each attack was presented as retaliation, as punishment for terror. Inside Libya, the story sounded different. The regime presented itself as the victim of Western aggression, targeted not for terrorism but for refusing to bow. The same events were being used by both sides to tell completely opposite stories. On one level, there were real victims of horrific attacks around the world, and Libyan links in some cases were clear. On another level, the terror state label was now doing double duty, describing violence and justifying a long campaign to weaken and eventually remove a government that had been a thorn in the West's side for decades. So what do we actually do with this history? We can't pretend Gaddafi was innocent. His government backed groups that killed civilians. He played games abroad that cost lives. But if we only look at that side, we miss something crucial. The same powerful countries that condemned him had no problem with dictators who stayed in line. It wasn't just about human rights or terrorism. It was about who controlled oil, borders, and regional politics. When a state nationalizes its resources, expels foreign bases, and then uses its wealth to support causes the superpowers don't like, it crosses an invisible line. From that point on, every misstep, every violent act becomes part of a case file. Proof that this government is too dangerous to be allowed to survive. Libya's case file was thick. Support for armed groups, confrontations with neighbors, fiery rhetoric, and a habit of humiliating Western leaders in public speeches. By the time the 21st century rolled around, many in Washington and European capitals had already decided how the story should end. They just needed the right moment. So was Libya a terrorist state? In some ways, yes. Was Libya also a threat to a certain idea of empire, an order where a few countries decide which governments are acceptable? Absolutely. And those two truths collided in ways that would be catastrophic for ordinary Libyans. In episode 1, we watched Libya seize control of its oil and kick out foreign bases. In this episode, we saw how that independence turned into a label: terrorist state. A label that opened the door to sanctions, isolation, and airstrikes. But the story doesn't end with isolation. In the next episode, something new arrives: the Arab Spring, color revolutions, and a wave of uprisings that give old regime change dreams a fresh opportunity. In episode 3, we're going to look at how the logic behind coups and covert operations matured, how the language shifted from fighting terror to protecting civilians, and how Libya turned from a pariah state into a target in a brand new kind of war. If you're finding this series useful, if it's helping you see the pattern behind the headlines, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who only knows Gaddafi as a cartoon villain from old news clips. Before you go, drop this in the comments for me. When you hear the phrase terrorist state, do you trust that label? Or do you now wonder what else might be hiding behind it?